We're going to go ahead and get started with our afternoon session. Again, I'm Dr. Kathy Anderson, a member of the Animal Welfare Committee. Very pleased to be here. Very pleased to see all the faces here. Very pleased to see the first-year students. God bless you and welcome. You are our exit strategy as we retire. So we're happy to see you particularly. In addition, I'd like to just kind of give you a little feeling for who's in the audience. We have veterinarians, we have production people, we have students, regulatory, and we have shelter, not only shelter veterinarians, but we also have members of sheltering various sheltering facilities here, including animal control officers and animal care technicians. So I'm very pleased that this meeting continues to grow and continues to become more and more diverse. It gives me great pleasure this afternoon to be opening this session and to have the privilege to introduce someone I've known too many years to mention, because then you would know how old we both really are. But he is a classmate of mine. This is Dr. Jim Kober, DVM, MS, and he's a Diplomate in ABVM, Swine Health Medicine. He is going to talk today about swine welfare from the producer's perspective. And let me just tell you a little bit about his bio. Dr. Kober grew up on a hog and fruit farm in Kent County. He earned his BS in animal science and his DVM degree from MSU. Go State! His MS degree is from Iowa State. He is board certified as a diplomat for the American Board of Veterinary Practitioners in Swine Health Management. Dr. Kober began his career as a mixed animal practitioner and started Swine Veterinary Services of Michigan in 1993. He joined 4-Star Veterinary Services in 2005, which has grown to a 10-doctor practice serving swine producers across the Eastern Corn Belt. He formed Alpine Pork in 2013, a swine production unit, and also formed 4-Star Animal Health with the goal of producing autogenous and commercial swine vaccines. Dr. Kober is a member of the MVMA's Animal Welfare Committee, the ABVP's CPAC Committee, is president of the ABV Foundation, chairs of the AASV Pig Welfare Committee, and is the nominee for the vice presidency of the AASV. It's too bad he's an underachiever. Welcome, Dr. Kober.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Kathy. Kathy and I were at vet school many, many years ago, and Edie was back there. She's a classmate as well. It always seems like our class is well represented at any kind of thing you want to go to with veterinarians involved, so that's good. We're an active class, and I appreciate that. So, getting started, Kathy mentioned most of this stuff here. Just a brief explanation. Swine Veterinary Services is my practice, and then 4-Star Veterinary Services, that's a group of swine veterinarians who formed a partnership in 2005. It started out as 6 solo practitioners, and we all do swine, and we are in 4 states, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. And we all practice by ourselves, so we formed a group, so now we practice as a group. Our clients cross paths in different states, pigs moving from state to state, and from 6 now it's grown to 10 veterinarians. So that's a little bit better, a bit of a group practice instead of practicing by yourself. If you practice by yourself, you find yourself talking to yourself, and that's not always good. And then my production entity, I bought the farm I grew up on in Kent County and put a hog barn up there called Alpine Pork. It's a 4,000 head contract finisher. And what a contract finisher means that I own the building and I supply the labor and somebody else brings the pigs. So I don't own the pigs, I just take care of them. So just think of it as a big piggy daycare center. So I take care of those pigs from about 15 pounds all the way up to market at about 300 pounds. So gives me something to do. And it's actually, even though I grew up on a hog farm and thought I knew quite a bit about hogs, taking care of them every day gave me a different perspective. So it's kind of like pet ownership. It's probably hard to be a veterinarian if you don't own a pet. So that's a bit about me. Now the main reason I wanted to speak this year, previous speakers at this conference all have mentioned the fact that gestation stalls, and in swine industry, pregnant sows are generally kept in stalls, individual stalls, and I'll show you some pictures of those, but they all mentioned in passing that stalls are bad for animals and they need to be in groups. And then they moved on and never explained that the good things about stalls, the bad things about stalls, the good things about pens, and the bad things about pens. And as most things, there's always the rest of the story. So simply moving pigs in pens from stalls sounds good on paper, it looks good in the pictures, but it's a lot harder than that. So I'm here to explain why that is not as easy as it sounds. So as I mentioned, most of the industry now, commercial industry, the pregnant sows are in these stalls, and actually they're bred in those stalls too. So they leave the farrowing crate at weaning and are put into these stalls. Sometimes there's a specific breeding area, sometimes not. Sometimes they go right into the barn and stay in that stall. So our options, if we get away from stalls, is group pens. There may be some other options, maybe perhaps outside, which I'll mention here in a little bit. That's not all it's all cracked up to be either. So there's another picture of some stalls, a fellow there doing the breeding. In addition to stalls, pretty much all of the commercial swine industry are bred by artificial insemination. There's very little boar work done anymore. It's all done in stalls here. So just a little bit of history of why did those sows end up in the stalls? They haven't always been in stalls. It kind of evolved. So just as a reference, in 2011, I wrote a letter for the Michigan Veterinary Medical Association newsletter about swine well-being and pork safety, and I kind of explained this, the evolution from pigs being outside in groups to inside in groups to inside being in individual stalls, and that was a transition that took place probably over 30 to 40 years. So it was a very slow, deliberate transition. We had reasons for doing that, we being the industry. And as we transitioned from outside sows, there's problems with weather outside, with predators, with some diseases outside. So producers on their own, nobody forced them to do this. They said, if we had these sows under a roof where we could take care of them better, give them a better environment, take them away from the predators, that would be great. So they moved their sow groups inside. But as they moved them inside in groups, they realized that pigs are very hierarchy oriented. By that I mean in any group of sows, be the group 2 sows or 20 sows or 200 sows, there's always going to be a boss. And there's always going to be the pig on the bottom end of the food chain. And the boss sow or the bully sow will get her way one way or another, and usually at the expense of those farther down the chain. So producers moved them inside thinking that this was better welfare, but then they had a lot of sows beating each other up, a lot of mortality, a lot of injuries. So then they put them in individual stalls. So again, that transition took place with experience and knowledge over a 20, 30, 40-year period, and that's the reason they end up in stalls. It wasn't that the commercial commercial sows have always been in stalls. It's just something that evolved over time. From a consumer point of view, the meat is actually better from pigs inside, in my opinion. We don't have hardly any parasites anymore, particularly external parasites. We don't have trichinella anymore, so we don't have to worry about that when we're cooking our meat. So the point of that article, and I don't think that's available electronically, Carlene said that was before they started putting the newsletters online. But if you want to dig that out, you can talk to Carlene or one of the gals at the MVMA office. So there's another picture of stalls. You can see these individual drop tubes, so we're able to feed these sows individually depending on their body condition. Now these stalls, I should tell you up front, everybody, regardless of what they're telling you, has a bias. And I learned this, most of you first-year students will appreciate this next semester when you have my wife. She forces me to read journal or articles out of the Harvard Business Review, if you can imagine that. So yesterday I was reading an article about how in every decision you make, in every statement that comes out of your mouth, there's bias. So with Lena's cow, bucking bull, and show bull, she has a bias. She raises pigs. Now, it might not have been obvious in the story she told you today, but I'm sure she has a bias at some level with those two bulls. She just didn't tell you what it was. I'll tell you up front that my bias is stalls. I would prefer to have sows in stalls because I feel I can take care of them better. I will also tell you some stalls are not good. These are too narrow. These are about 19 inches. Pretty dang narrow for a sow. So we could do some things to improve living in a stall. These are wider. These are about 24 inches. And those sows have quite a bit of more room than the others. But stalls themselves are perceived as bad. So these are our reasonings why we like gestation stalls. We can ensure proper nutrition to the individual sow. So in group housing, usually the feed is just dumped in a pile or dumped in certain spots, and sows are left to fend for themselves to get the right amount. We can monitor our individual health a lot better. So if a sow is sick or running a fever, we can identify that a lot quicker in stalls than we can in pens. We can certainly treat sick sows quicker if we determine they need to be treated. I can tell you from experience in pens, a sick sow with a fever of 105 can still run pretty dang fast. So it's pretty hard to treat. You have to have your track shoes on. So in a stall, she's right there. You can get the medication into her a lot easier. The main thing here, why stalls are good, to manage sow aggression and dominance. And this is a huge deal. And I can show you some slides later on why it really bothers me that we can't manage that as well as we could in pens. And we minimize sow lameness and injuries. Any questions so far? Awesome. So why all the hubbub about sow stalls? Many of you don't care. Many of you never work on pigs. That's good for me. But in Europe, in 2003, Europe declared that by 2013, all pregnant sows had to be out of the stalls. That was a big welfare thing for them. And that passed the legislature in the European Union, so that was the law. Well, in the U.S., there wasn't a nationwide law, and some things started to change in the U.S., and it was not necessarily legislated, but there was a lot of ballot initiatives soon after the European thing, and that was all driven by HSUS. It was not driven by consumers per se or the restaurant industry, but HSUS, Humane Society of the United States, went in some individual states, Florida, Arizona, California, and passed laws, put laws on the ballot that said we should outlaw sow stalls. Most of them passed, and when states tried to fight that, it cost a lot of money for lawyers and this and that. So other states, including Michigan, negotiated an agreement with HSUS. Notice it's not negotiated with the legislature, it's negotiated with the U.S., or HSUS rather. negotiate an agreement to get rid of stalls. And in Michigan, it was legislated. Michigan decided they didn't want to spend a bunch of money fighting the HSUS, so they just negotiated with them to get rid of stalls. Many of those, these other states, many of the negotiations said that sows can stay in stalls for 30 days post-mating. That's oftentimes when we do preg checks on the sows, and then they had to move into group housing of some sort. Michigan's statute says they can stay in stalls until they're confirmed pregnant. That's a subtle difference, and at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. So let me get back up here. So in response to the European law and HSUS starting this movement on individual states to get rid of stalls, the ABMA initiated a task force to study sow housing, and they were interested from a veterinary perspective, is this something we need to be involved in, or is this something we should just let lie? So they commissioned a group of experts, 13 in all, and they included welfare experts, animal scientists, veterinarians, behaviorists, and even included people from HSUS and the animal rights groups. And they were tasked to study all the available literature on sow housing, whether it was good for sows, bad for sows, groups better than stalls, and so on. They reviewed 95 articles on that topic, and at the end they wrote a report that was entitled A Comprehensive Review of Housing for Pregnant Sows. So what do you think they found? They found that it doesn't matter. Considering all factors, all sow housing systems in current use have advantages and disadvantages for animal welfare. So one was not found to be any better than the other, and they looked at physiology of the animal, they measured stress hormones, all of those studies did not come up with a clear answer of one housing system having an advantage or the other. Because the advantages and disadvantages of housing systems are qualitatively different, there is no simple or objective way to rank systems for overall welfare. In such cases, science can identify problems and find solutions, but cannot calculate and compare overall welfare in different systems. So no clear winner, the pens didn't win, the sows didn't win. Scientifically, and according to the literature, one was not better than the other. Now the ABMA and also the American Association of Swine Veterinarians, they both have position statements, and as you graduate and get more involved, hopefully in organized veterinary medicine, you'll come to understand that the associations, the state associations, the species associations, and particularly the ABMA, they have oodles of policy statements, which tries to declare what they believe is right and what's wrong. And I tell you, you haven't lived until you've been in a policy statement meeting for an afternoon. That is some boring work, but work that needs to be done. So the ABMA, the ABMA and the ASV both have position statements on pregnant sow housing, and for the most part, this is the meat of them, and they're very similar. Minimize aggression and competition among sows. Protect pigs from environmental extremes. Reduce exposure from injuries, pain, and disease. Provide daily access to food and water. Facilitate observation of appetite, respiratory rate, urination, defecation, and reproductive status. And allow sows to express most normal patterns of behavior. Now those are pretty similar to the 5 freedoms that Lena and Kathy were talking about this morning, right? So they all evolve around those 5 freedoms. The interesting thing is, as I said, ASV, ABMA both have these position statements on pregnant sow housing, and most of those were written not necessarily by veterinarians, but certainly with a lot of veterinary input. Now the ABMA, as you dig a little deeper into their position statements, they also have guidance documents, which are meant to explain how they came about their policy statements. So the ABVMA has this guidance document on sow housing, and interesting, no veterinarians were included in the writing. It's all staff people for ABVMA writing a guidance document to try to explain this, and their report is entitled Literature Review on Welfare Implication of Gestation Sow Housing. So they came up with this nice graph, and I don't know how well you can read that from the back of the room, but red is bad, green is good, and they looked at these 12 different attributes and compared stalls, groups or pens, and free range, which is outside sows. So environmental noise and ammonia, free range got good because they're outside, inside sows not so much. Exposure to climate, stalls inside good, I'm not sure why that's not green. Outside, that's bad for exposure, and so on. Exposure to predators, exposure to parasites, sow access to food, productivity, sow lameness, sow mobility, the stall's got a big red one for that, injuries, sow behavior, foraging opportunities, obviously the outside sows are going to be best on that, and inter-sow aggression. I'm not sure why anything of these groups is not red down here. So some of their color schemes are a little different than I would have put them, but that's their document, so they can say anything they want. So then the animal rights people said, look at this, the sows and stalls have 3 red strikes against them. And the group pens don't have any red strikes. Well, my argument, looking at the glass the other way, half full, half empty, the stalls have 5 green marks, and the group pens only have 1. So that might indicate stalls are better than pens. So I thought that was an interesting way to compare, and we can all put our own colors on there. So at the end of the day, there's really no scientific evidence that stalls are bad or that pens are better. But we're being forced to do away with stalls. And the reason is HSUS, after they had got a few states on their side, and the states banned stalls. And most of those states, Florida, Arizona, California, don't have very many pigs. So in the big picture, the industry didn't really make that much difference. But then they learned, instead of going to the pig-dense states, where they would have a bigger fight, they decided they were going to go straight to the consumer, and the consumer in this case being the restaurants, being McDonald's, Arby's, TGI Fridays, Arby's, and all the big chains, and said, you know, you really shouldn't buy your meat from pigs who are housed in stalls. They didn't know any better. They're intimidated by HSUS, so they said, okay. So now, in the past couple of years, most of the restaurants in the country have come out with statements saying we are not going to buy meat from farms who still house their sows in stalls. So stalls are not necessarily outlawed, and I don't know if that's spelled correctly or not. My spell check didn't help me out on that one, but. So the stalls are not outlawed, but the meat processors who are buying the pigs are not buying pigs from farms that have stalls. So we're being forced away from stalls and into pens, not because there's scientific evidence that we should do so, but because of consumer preference. And as veterinarians, that kind of rubs me the wrong way. I personally, as I mentioned, I have a bias to stalls, but I will make pens work. It bothers me that most of our decisions as veterinarians are made on science. Our dosages, our vaccines, our antibiotics are all based in science, research, facts, but this one is not. This is no science involved. It's strictly public perception and what the consumers think about sow stalls. So that's a little scary. As I mentioned, if you want to use the 5 freedoms of animal welfare, Lena and Kathy already talked about these. Freedom from thirst and hunger, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury, disease, freedom to express most normal behavior, freedom from fear and distress. So if you look at that with the stalls, and assuming that the ability to turn around is a normal behavior, so stalls fail at that one, but they do provide the other 4, so they're 4 out of 5. What about pens? Well, in pens, these stalls are certainly not free from pain, injury, and disease, so that's 4 out of 5 if you give them this, but I contend they lose on this too, so that's only going to be 3 out of 5. And the reason I say that, mentioned earlier, sows are aggressive, they fight each other, and the dominant sow is going to win. This is what you end up with when you mix those sows. This sow is the bottom of the food chain, different sow, different pen. These are pictures I took in my client herds, and this really distresses me when I see these sows. They'll need to be pulled out, given time to recover, if they recover at all. And it bothers me when I go through a barn like this, and I know there's something I can do to totally prevent this so it doesn't happen. Next picture is even more graphic. What big sows do is when we feed them in groups, these aggressive sows, they'll eat their 5 or 6 pounds in about a minute, and then they go up and bite the tail end of a sow who's still eating, and she moves away, then she gets half of that food. So those dominant, bossy sows are running around biting these girls on the butt, getting them to move so they can have their share of the feed. Question? Good question. So the question is, so why not make stalls bigger? And that is an option. The main thing is, I think, my impression is that they want the sows to be able to get up and turn around. So basically, if you made them that big, you'd have individual pens, and that would be an option, but that would be pretty expensive to build barns like that for individual pens. So the next thing is group pens. There used to actually be, and I'm a little surprised, one equipment manufacturer made what they called turnaround stalls. So the stall hinged, so if a sow moved in back, she could actually turn around in the same stall. And I'm not sure why that hasn't gotten any traction in all this sow stall argument. So that seems like that would be a logical thing to do for me, but that's not getting any play right now. So these are some options that producers are going to now. 4 different ones primarily, and there may be others, and we may come up with others. Producers tend to be pretty ingenious, and they'll come up with a solution for this. Kicking and screaming, but they will. Electronic sow feeding. We have a version of short stalls with trickle feeding, floor feeding, and free access stalls. So I'll show you some pictures of some of those. And at the end of the day, we all want this. Any type of sow housing, the appropriate training is required for any management system to accommodate the welfare of the sow. So it doesn't matter if it's stalls, pens, electronic sow feeding, any of those, we need good training. So I've got these couple pictures. It's not a very good picture for you to see, but electronic sow feeding, similar to what the dairies do, I think you've heard about. There's one feeding stall, and that'll accommodate up to 70 sows, so you can have larger groups of sows. Those groups can be either static or dynamic, which means you form a group of 70 to start with at the beginning of gestation, and that group stays together, as opposed to dynamic groups where there's sows coming and going every week. In these systems, these electronic sow feeding, the sows have an electronic tag in their ear. They walk into the sow, into the stall, the gate closes behind them, so nobody's going to be biting at their tail, and the computer allots their daily amount of feed, be it 4.5, 5, 6, 7 pounds, whatever. that producer has determined that sow needs. That much feed drops, and she stands there and takes her as much time as she wants to eat. Once she's done, she leaves the stall, the back gate opens up, and the next sow comes in. Now that takes quite a bit of training for both the sows and the people doing that, but a lot of people are using this system now with good success. The drawback is expensive compared to normal stall barns. It's about anywhere from $700 to $1,000 a sow added expense. And another advantage, you can use this on solid floor with bedding or with slatted floors where the manure is underneath the barn. Short stalls with trickle feeding. This type of system takes those individual gestation stalls and leaves about 2 feet of them. And just so when a sow is eating there, her head is protected and a bully sow can't come up and bite her on the ear. But to me, the key here is trickle feeding. And what that means is the feed, the auger for the feed is going really slow, so it trickles out. It may take half an hour for 5 pounds to drop out instead of 5 pounds all at once. And what it does is it prevents the big eaters from moving from stall to stall, because they don't want to move until the feed is done dropping. So they stay in their own stall and wait and wait and wait. And it takes a long time for them to eat their allotment, but then once their allotment is gone, everybody else's is too. So that helps quite a bit with the tail and the bulbal biting. And some of this equipment advantage, some of the equipment can be reused, so you can just take the existing stalls, cut them off, and revamp your feed system. Free access stalls, I had a picture of those. These are, I don't think these are going to catch on, because these are stalls where a sow is standing. If she wants to back out, she backs against the gate. It kind of flips up and stays open. There's a loafing area behind her. And when she wants to go back in the stall, she goes in, she hits the bar on her shoulder as she's walking in, and that back gate closes behind her. So this kind of is the best of both worlds. She can get out and wander around in the loafing area if she wants to, but when she goes back in, then it closes behind her and she's by herself. The problem with these is there's a lot of moving parts. And sows, just like cows, are pretty hard on the equipment, and so I don't think the equipment's going to hold up for this so much. Go back here and find the ears. That's what these are here. This back gate, once a sow backs into it, flips up. She can stay out in the general population. You can see this one actually came halfway out and sat down, so her gate is halfway up there. Same with this one, looks like she's backing out, so the gate flips up, sits there open until she goes back in. The interesting thing on these free access stalls is the sow is actually given a choice of being in the stall or in a group in a loafing, and they'll spend about 80% of their time in the stall with the gate closed. So it seems like that's what they prefer. And floor feeding, this is the easiest to do. You just rip all the stalls out. You have a group pen, and you have to have a solid area, either a trough or solid concrete where you can drop the feed. Most producers just drop feed once a day, so they get their feed all at once. I think it would work better. I try to get my clients with these systems to make multiple drops per day, so that bully sow doesn't get 3 meals all at once. This seems to have less fighting if you do multiple drops. This is a conversion of choice for many producers early on. Really low investment. All they have to do is take the existing stalls out and make sure there's a solid surface to feed on. So it's really cheap. It's quite easy. But I think they're going to go to one of the other systems, because this one, if you're just dropping once a day, as I mentioned, the boss sows is going to get a lot more of her share of feed. And one interesting thing I should have said with those sows I showed you that were all feed up from fighting, it's interesting, or kind of ironic, I guess, that as we go away from individual sow stalls, when we have a sow like that and we need to get her by herself, we put her back into an individual stall to recover. And and that usually works as long as they don't get down too bad. So it's just ironic to me that we don't like sow stalls, but if we need a hospital pen for them to be in by themselves, we put them back into an individual stall to recover. So in conclusion, producers are going to be forced to switch, even though there's no scientific evidence that group housing is better. That's public perception. We'll get there. Producers are resilient and they'll figure things out themselves. One of the things, people have always questioned me on how these sows stand up and how they do in stalls. They don't move, they don't get exercise like we think they should. And really, when we moved from outside to the inside groups to the individual stalls, it took us a few generations to get the bugs worked out of that. It wasn't automatic. In other words, we couldn't take those sows that were used to being outside and put them in stalls. They didn't hold up. We had a lot of feet and leg injuries, but that's been 30 years, so 50 or 60 generations. We've really developed a pretty good sow that is really resilient that way. And now we're not going to be able to take that sow that does well in the stall and put her back in the pen. It's just going to take us a few generations to get there. And the analogy I use for that is, in the world of running, we have marathon runners and we have sprinters. And we can't one day just tell them, okay, switch. Now the marathon guys are going to do a sprint. Now you sprint guys are going to do a marathon. They might get there eventually because they're probably good athletes, but it'll be a little bit rough transition. So that's what I feel is we're going to get there in group gestation. It's not easy. We're going to have a lot of mortality. We're going to have a lot of wounded sows until we get the genetics right, until we get the equipment right. So it's not, as I mentioned, I think we're going to get there, but pens are not the panacea that some of the animal rights people think they are. And in the big picture, I alluded to earlier, it bothers me that producers are having to make this transition without really any good evidence to do so. If you want an analogy for the small animal people, let's say that there was a group out there who was against spaying cats for population control. And they were well-funded and had big names backing them. So they came to the small animal veterinarian and said, you can't spay cats anymore. Most of you, I think, would really have a problem with that. But if they got enough political power behind them and enough political clout, then that might become law that you can no longer spay cats. And that would be without any good scientific evidence. So I hope that you will become involved in regulatory medicine and organized medicine, your state association, your species association. So hopefully that won't happen to you where you're pushed into doing something because of public perception instead of really based on science. So one ironic twist to all this earlier this spring in March or April, there was a YouTube video of a HSUS employee, and this employee was hired to go on farms, to get hired on pig farms and go in and secretly tape acts of abuse and things. We've seen those nasty things in the dairy industry, in the beef industry, in the pig industry. So this person was hired to go in and show all the bad things he could find about individual sow stalls and how bad they were. Well, this video was taken of him being interviewed after he left that job because he became so frustrated because the longer he worked on that farm undercover, he realized, in his opinion anyway, that stalls were actually better than pens. So he quit working for HSUS and came forward. Interesting, that YouTube video used to be available, and I heard it's been taken off now, so you guys can search if you want to see that. So in his interview also, he also indicated that the real goal of HUS is not necessarily to help the welfare of domestic animals. It was in fact to have it so no animals were used for meat at all. So that was a slap to the food industry. So if you can find that video, it's worth finding. I have a written article about it if you're interested in that as well. So that's all I had. Any questions, comments, complaints? Yeah.
I have a question. What I'm curious about, we went to festival here, and I grew up in an old agrarian style pig farm. I grew up on a pig farm like you did. We barreled outside for Southwest Michigan, and you and I know what that means. It's outside. Is anybody doing that anymore? I'm not seeing them out there. That's my first question.
There are a handful of people trying to do that. Most of them are involved in the organic market.
Okay. So the old mass producers, when I drive Southwest Michigan now, I see nobody barreling outside.
No, what Kathy's alluding to, my first job was in Cass County, Michigan. All the sows were farrowed outside and grew outside. The downfall of that is in 1991, the packers started paying for lean instead of just pounds per head. Lean, so they started measuring the loin and loin depth and the amount of fat on animals. And you can't really raise a real, at that time, everybody wanted leaner pork, because of the health aspect. And you really couldn't raise real lean pork outside.
So that's where the pressure came.
Yeah, you had to have more back fat so they could survive outside.
Because I'm curious, when I look at this, when I look at the group of pen housing, to me, in my old definition, and again, the other thing that I think sometimes we don't talk about is in the last 30 years in the pork industry, we've seen really classically, sorry, and of course I'm real animated, we've seen the real transition from the agrarian lifestyle to the industrial lifestyle in many of our producer industries, and certainly I see that in the pork in the pork industry. And so I look at what I grew up with, which we didn't, because we were doing what we were doing, we would bring our sows in and farrow in crates and then move them into large pens, but they were not stacked real heavily. And we did a lot of, we're a small farm, we're not mass production, you raise 1,000 hogs a year and that's no big shakes, right? And so I look at that and I think we weren't really economically viable either, so there were the economics involved. But the one thing I do know watching it firsthand is that we did not have a lot of the, and I know what sows do, but we did not have a lot of the fighting issues because we were not as heavily stacked, and we also, our animals had access to outside. You know what I'm saying? So I guess what I'm asking you is, are we sort of missing this completely? If this isn't really so much an issue with the types of housing, but the fact that we're seeing that we've undergone really a cultural revolution in terms of our farm style, and that now we're having to readjust.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. The thing in the big picture, I think the leaner genetics are more aggressive. So as we've created a leaner pig or leaner pork meat, they've gotten more aggressive and more cranky. So we do occasionally have trouble with tail biting, ear biting, things like that. So behavioral problems, and I think a lot of that is genetics, really lean genetics. Now it's interesting as through the 70s and 80s and 90s, people were demanding leaner pork for a healthier lifestyle. And I think the pendulum has swung too far. I think we've gotten the pigs too lean, and actually they're starting to come back a little bit. Yeah. So especially in the show pig industry, those pigs are so lean that it doesn't even make a good eating experience. So we're actually, some of the big breeding companies are moving the pendulum back to put a little more fat into the
I haven't even thought about the genetics aspect. It was longer because we just couldn't see it. And we call it again here. because we were a small farm, we were culling aggressively too. We had an aggressive sow. You know, she just didn't make the grade. She had to be able to play nicely with other pigs. You know.
So my question was, what percentage of ad-lib intake does that pregnant sow get?
Pregnant sows do not get ad-lib feed. We give
I
them.
know, what percentage of ad-lib?
How much are you asking?
No, I'm asking if I would eat 6 steaks a day, how many steaks would the sow get?
Well, a sow gets 5 to 6 pounds through gestation. So that's a little less than 1%. Or, well, a little more than 1%. She weighs
For body weight?
Yeah, 500
Or
500
25%
pounds.
of what she would eat. Because I wonder, having been on that sow welfare committee, that a lot of this aggression is driven by hunger. And if we fed them a bit more,
Yeah,
we could reduce the aggression.
one of the lecturers last year mentioned that too. But the reality is, any species that's pregnant, nobody eats ad-lib. They shouldn't. They might, but
as
they
far as
shouldn't.
I know horses do.
So, in reality, though, if we gave her 10 pounds instead of 6 pounds, she would get enormous, and that would create farrowing problems and lactation problems and everything else. So, if it is a problem that we're not feeding enough, then we need to develop a sow that is satisfied eating that much without eating overweight. So, it's a work in progress. Thank you. Anybody else? I'm glad there's actually interest.
So I just have a quick question with the gestation crates. Do you see with our lobbying to try to get rid of them, it being a potential issue with farrowing crates, or are they trying to get rid of farrowing crates as well?
I understand in Europe they're trying to do with farrowing crates. It's still kind of on the edge of the radar screen in the United States, but I don't doubt eventually they'll try to get those too.
And do you think that'll become more of an ethical issue because of mortality rate with piglets?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. There's definitely you can definitely show an increase in premium mortality in hens versus farrowing crates. So I don't know if that'll come in. Theoretically, that shouldn't be part of the argument, but whether it will or not, I don't know.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm from the United Kingdom, and we haven't had sow stalls since 1999. They were banned in the UK then, and we're slightly different from the rest of Europe. They're also banning stalls in New Zealand and Australia, so a lot of other countries around the world have followed suit. So I do think there is some kind of whole world move towards getting away from the sow stalls. So I think the fact that America, the USA, are following suit probably it was inevitable, really. And I understand that it's going to be really difficult for producers to make the conversion, but it will, I think, eventually happen in time. And I just wanted to say that a well-designed group housing system for sows really does work, even on really large farms. I think it's taken a long time, but it has happened in the UK, and it will happen in Europe, and I'm sure it will happen here as well. But it is very tough for the producers, and I totally understand that. But just about the fighting thing, because you've kind of mentioned it briefly, but like on your finisher farm, they obviously get mixed, and they must fight quite vigorously as well. So it's not just an issue with the sows; it's also an issue throughout all the stages of production. So I guess, what do you think about that, and what more can we be doing for that side of it as well?
Again, I think the leanness of these sows and pigs, the growing pigs, affects that. And what I do, I probably get away with more mixing than others, just because I'm trying to pigs. But if I have two groups, well, first of all, most of the pigs are put in pens at weaning and never change pens. That's the objective. So they're getting used to each other at weaning. And actually, the weaned pigs fight some, but when they start fighting, they realize they're hungry and they're away from mom, so there's other bigger things on their minds. So fighting at that time is not always a big deal. But if I decide to mix a couple pens, what I'll do is, this is totally unscientific, this is what I do. Take 2 pens, put them in a different pen so nobody is in their home pen. Do it late in the day, turn out the lights so it's totally dark. And if I can, I'll actually let them commingle between 2 or 3 pens for 3 or 4 hours before I actually put them into the final pen. And then put them in the final pen, turn the lights out, and I rarely have a problem doing that. So I have a question for you, and that is the farrowing crate question. Do you see in the UK, are they still able to use individual farrowing crates? Or?
Yeah, they do use individual farrowing crates, but I think you're right in saying that I think it will be the next thing to go. And I've actually worked on a project creating a really well-designed farrowing pen, and we have managed mortality figures similar to that of the crates. I think it will be quite a few years down the line, though, that it will happen. But we have about over 40% now of sows that farrow outdoors, because we obviously don't have the same climatic issues as you have here, so it works a bit better. I'm not saying their welfare is perfect, because they have parasites and the problems of being outside and the occasional heat stress and cold issues, but slightly different. But I think it will happen eventually.
Yeah, I think so too. And that you mentioned the word perfect, and there may not be a perfect system for everybody. So there's always going to be a little bit of a shortcoming somewhere, but we'll deal with it.
Thank you, Dr.
One
Coleman.
message.
Lena, that's evil.